Hello, everyone. So today's case, we're talking about the case of Emmanuel Littlejohn. So this is the main case that I've been working on, putting all of my energy into, hoping to give you good news when I do. Unfortunately, it is not. The outcome of this is absolutely heartbreaking. So when I started this podcast, it was because of the case of Julius Jones, who is an innocent black man who was on death row in Oklahoma, which is where I'm from. Julius had a better but not the best outcome, and Emmanuel's story sat with me like Julius's did. So today I'm going to tell you about the case of Emmanuel Littlejohn, who was murdered by the state for a crime that he probably didn't even commit. Now, there was a crime committed. He was involved in this crime, but not what they say he did. At least not in my opinion. And I'm going to tell you the evidence, lack thereof, weird evidence, I guess you could say. And this case is going to be very upsetting. I did get emotional when I was researching this, especially when it gets to the part. You're going to see. It's going to be really sad. But this one just stuck with me because my state has a horrendous track record with innocent people on death row, and we're going to have statistics. I'm going to give you the case, and we're going to talk about what happened just a couple months ago. So the way I'm going to talk to this is I'm going to give you like a brief overview of what happened. I'm not going to go like a full in-depth video on the case itself. And that's because when I'm looking into Emmanuel, most of it was just like quick overviews and like what's going on with him now. And so that's how I'm going to kind of present it, but I am going to tell you what happened. And we're probably going to go back and forth on some things. I'm going to try to present it in a way where you don't get confused. But this had me doing days of research, so if it gets a little weird, that's probably because of where I stopped while I was researching and probably was confused coming back, but I'm going to do my best to not confuse you guys. But let's go ahead and get into this. So in 1992, Emmanuel and Glenn Bethany, they robbed the Root and Scoop convenience store in Oklahoma City. During the robbery, one of the men shot and killed the store owner, Kenneth Mears, with a single bullet. The physical evidence in the case was inconclusive. So, Oklahoma's felony murder law, which holds defendants responsible for death that occurs during a violent felony, allowed both men to be charged with murder. At Glenn Bethany's 1993 trial, the prosecutor argued that Glenn fired the shot, and he was convicted of robbery with a firearm and first-degree murder. The next year, the same prosecutor told the jury that Emmanuel, not Glenn, pulled the trigger. Emmanuel was also convicted of a robbery with a firearm and first-degree murder, but the jury found Emmanuel had acted with malice, which is a harsher determination that was not made in Glenn's case. So only Emmanuel was sentenced to death. I'm not here to tell you that a crime didn't occur. It did. A man was shot and killed, and that is heartbreaking for him and his family. I am here to tell you a case that has inconclusive evidence has no right to sentence someone to death. The way I view the death penalty is how I'm going to tell you. So Oklahoma, like I said, has a track record with wrongful convictions to this day. So yes, both men committed a crime, and Kenneth Mears lost his life, but we cannot say for sure which one pulled the trigger, and unless you're 1,000% sure, why are they on death row? That is how I feel. This is someone's life. When you put someone on death row, you are essentially playing God. You get to decide this man took this man's life, so now the state is going to take this man's life. But we cannot say for sure which one it was. We know one of them did. We don't know which one, because the DNA evidence was inconclusive. So they do not know. That is just one of the absolute mind-boggling things in this case. And you might be thinking, well, a man still lost his life. Okay, but there was only one bullet shot, which means one person shot that gun. We cannot say for sure which one it is. They both were charged or convicted of a robbery with a firearm and first-degree murder. They both could have just served life in prison. They did not have to put either one of them on death row. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous that they did this with Emmanuel and not Glenn. So, since 1994, 133 people on death row have been exonerated, and many others have maintained their innocence until they have been executed. Prosecutors now seek the death penalty less frequently, but the damage has already been done. How many innocent people were murdered because they couldn't be exonerated? In fact, 50% of people believe the death penalty is applied unfairly, and 47% believe that it's applied fairly. Experts warn that cases like Emmanuel's, where prosecutors present two different versions of events and two different trials, because that is what he was doing. He was not giving the facts, he was presenting two different stories. Let's make that very clear. If he was giving the facts, he would have told it as it is. There is inconclusive evidence in this case, and we're not sure which one pulled the trigger. We just know that one of them did. He did not say that. He said Glenn pulled it. And then the next one he said Emmanuel pulled it. He is giving two different versions of the story, and one of them is wrong. So let's be very clear about that. So, the fact that he is doing this, he's just undermining the public faith in the American criminal courts. Like, a lot of people, they don't believe in the court of justice anymore because there's not justice. This is not a justice system. This is just a system working as is intended, and that is to kill someone for something they may or may not have done, but at the end of the day, someone got locked up. So the then Oklahoma Attorney General, Robert Macy, argued his first capital murder case in 1981. Macy won, even though Clifford Henry Bowen had 12 witnesses testifying that he'd been 300 miles away in another state. Thankfully, Bowen's case would be thrown out, but his attorney referred to it as, quote, the greatest miscarriage of justice in Oklahoma history. Between 1980 and 2001, Robert Macy sent 54 people to death row, making him the deadliest DA in the U.S. 3 people convicted would later be exonerated. Prosecutorial misconduct was found in 1/3 of his successful death penalty cases. So he is not good at his job, whether intentionally or not. He's just not good at his job. So we're going to switch gears, and we're going to switch from me telling you about Robert Macy to actually talking about Emmanuel. I told you about the case. Let's talk about who he is or was as a person. So he endured a tumultuous childhood and adolescence. His mother was a drug addict, and he often lived with his paternal grandmother, who ran a, quote, good times house that was of gambling, prostitution, and drug use to make ends meet. His dad was chronically ill with polio, and he was a volatile man who exposed Emmanuel to violence from an early age. When he was 15, Emmanuel learned how to hotwire cars, and he began to steal them. Just weeks after his release from juvie for car theft, he conducted an armed robbery, which was shortly after he was released for that crime, and that is when he robbed the Root and Scoot with Glenn. So he had a very hard bringing up, and I'm not trying to excuse his behavior. I'm just trying to explain to you who he was as a person. His family was poor. He had a volatile childhood. He was basically set up for failure. And that is all he's known his entire life. Because when it came time for this trial, he was basically told that he did something that he probably didn't do. And that breaks my heart. So no, I'm not trying to make excuses for him, but I'm trying to make you understand how he was as a person. Like, this is all he knows. This is the life he knows. At trial, the prosecutor argued that, quote, the testimony of the people inside the store was the only person who ever had a gun that night was Emmanuel Antonio Littlejohn, end quote. And the jury decided that this was true, But they had not been told that the prosecutor had given two different stories, so that they were told that the witnesses said the only person who had a gun was Emmanuel. But this same story was told to another jury about Glenn. During Glenn's trial, the prosecutor said that neighbors had seen the taller of the two men pointing a gun into the store, which would implicate Glenn, who was 6 years older, and he was also much, much taller than Emmanuel, and therefore it would make him the leader of the situation, which he's bigger in size, he's older in age, he would have been the leader. He probably would have been the one with the gun. This is a quote from Emma Rolls, who is a federal defender from the federal defender office that represented Emmanuel. And Emma says, "It's outrageous if you look at it. I mean, they used the exact same argument against both men when it was an impossibility. It's necessarily contradictory," end quote. At the August clemency hearing, an attorney from the state said that prosecutors had argued that Glenn merely could have been the shooter. A district court had previously agreed with this description, writing a 2010 opinion denying Emmanuel's request for habeas corpus that, quote, "the prosecutor made no outright assertions that Bethany was the shooter," end quote. The state attorney general's office reaffirmed their desire to kill Emmanuel Littlejohn when they emailed the appeal, which is a paper, with this quote, and they said that the Oklahoma Attorney General's office stands squarely in support of Emmanuel Littlejohn's execution, a punishment that caps years of careful appellate review and the even-handed verdicts of two separate juries. Not only is Littlejohn's sentence the legally correct outcome, it will also mark the delivery of final justice for the memory of Kenny Mears, a hard-working Oklahoman who suffered a horrific end for the sake of a few $100s, end quote. No one said that Emmanuel should be completely freed and let off. Someone did die. This was a crime. But there were two people involved. We just don't know who committed the act of actually taking Kenny's life. What if it had been Glenn? And the state killed the man who never actually shot the fatal bullet, because Glenn is still alive. Glenn was never put to death. So was justice still served? What if it was Glenn and you killed the wrong man? Is justice still being served? Do they even care? They'd be like, well, he's still locked up. The point of this was to kill the man who killed Kenny. What if you didn't get the right one? So Emmanuel's trial was plagued with a ton of other legal issues. His attorneys, for example, admitted their client's guilt before the jury was even selected. This defense only called one witness during the guilt phase, and that witness was his mom, Celie Mason, who says, "If I'd been the black woman that had a little bit of money, my son wouldn't be on death row. I didn't have the kind of money to get a good lawyer, and so Emmanuel got what he got." And that is what she said, because she was reflecting about, like, could I have saved him? Could I have done more for my son? And that was what her thought was. And you may be thinking, well, his own defense basically admitted his guilt. He's guilty, right? Wrong. Several cases have had their defense do this, and it's not because the defendants were guilty, but they had incompetent or lazy lawyers who completely fucked them over. After his first trial, he was sentenced to death based on 3 factors: previous felony convictions, and that he posed an ongoing threat to society, and that he had knowingly created great risk of death to more than one person. His lawyers appealed to the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, which overturned his death sentence, finding that there was little basis for 2 of the 3 factors. At his year 2000 resentencing, the jury sent the judge a note asking whether it was, quote, "possible to change the verdict of life without parole to with parole after our verdict and without another jury verdict," end quote. Emmanuel's lawyers argued in their clemency packet that this question indicated that the jury was confused about sentencing protocols and concerned that Emmanuel would go free if given life without parole. The judge declined to answer this question, and the jury once again sentenced him to death. Multiple jurors have now said that they did not understand the sentencing guidelines. In a sworn affidavit, one juror from the legal trial wrote that she decided to sentence him to death because she felt, quote, "the alternative was that he would get loose if given another punishment," A juror from 2000 said in retrospect that she would not vote for death, so she would not have made that same decision again. Last year, Emmanuel had a stroke that left him largely confined to a wheelchair and had a neurological disease that impacts his mobility. But the state still argued that he was dangerous. They said that he was undeserving of clemency because of his violent nature and lack of remorse, despite not having a violent offense in 20 years. Governor Stitt took office in 2019, and since only 3 men's lives have been spared, and Julius Jones' sentence was commuted, a decision that came just mere hours before he was even to be executed. Last year, Stitt waited until after a man's execution was scheduled to begin to deny clemency. 14 executions have been carried out under Stitt. 14 under our current governor. So I'm telling you these stats because I think I'm trying to paint this picture that Oklahoma has a horrendous track record. And I hope you're seeing it. We have another quote from Celie Mason, who says, "For them to kill my son is ridiculous. I believe in justice too. What I don't believe in is vengeance, and that's what this is. This is vengeance. It scares me to death that they might kill my son for something that he did not even do." End quote. The Pardon and Parole Board voted 3-2 for clemency. However, on September 26, 2024, 52-year-old Emmanuel Littlejohn received a lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary and was declared dead at 10:17 a.m. And this is the part that broke my heart. While he was strapped to a gurney with an IV in his arm, Emmanuel looked at his mom and daughter who would witness this execution. And he looked over at his mom and said, "Mom, are you okay?" And Celie said, "I'm okay." And in his response, he said, "Everything is going to be okay. I love you." I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. And Celie would sob quietly and clutched a cross necklace during the injection. Emmanuel's spiritual advisor, Reverend Jeff Hood, was inside the death chamber and prayed over him while this happened. I'm so sorry for getting so emotional. I just can't imagine watching your child be a victim of state-sanctioned murder for something they probably did not do. And even with his last dying breath, he was telling his mom that everything was going to be okay. Now that I've told you the story, do you think that justice was served? Because I don't. I think a family lost someone who was left to the mercy of incompetent lawyers and a racist government who loves to kill people. I think he was the victim of a state-sanctioned murder. And like I've said numerous times, a crime was committed. Kenneth Mears was killed for something that he was just in his store, probably what he does every day. He did not deserve to be killed, and I want to make that very clear. Kenneth Mears did not deserve what he got. He does deserve justice as well, but so did Emmanuel. Because we do not know 100% sure if it was him or Glenn. And yes, it absolutely could have been Emmanuel. But the signs just weren't pointing towards it. There was not enough evidence there. And I feel like if you really look at everything I've told you, you cannot say 100% that it was him. I don't think he should have been killed, at most. Keep him in prison for the rest of his life. But at least he would be alive. I don't think he deserved to be killed. So, I don't think that justice was served. And my heart hurts for this family. I was on pins and needles waiting to hear if Governor Stitt would give him clemency, and when he didn't, I spent a while that day crying. It is cruel and it's unfair, and I'm not going to go into how much I despise Governor Stitt, because I really do. I wanted to tell you about Emmanuel's story, and I think we need to tell you his story because another man was killed, Marcellus Williams, which is going to be the next video I do. And then there was another man that this happened to again. This is happening too often when there is absolutely no evidence or not enough. And I think it's important that we talk about it because states are killing people that might be innocent. So thank you so much for listening to Emmanuel's story. If his family comes across this video, I am so sorry. I wish this wasn't the outcome, but maybe putting his name out there will do something good. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'm gonna go before I start crying again. And just thank you for listening to his story. Bye, guys.